Well, great. It's a pleasure to be with you all today, and thanks for taking the time. I'm going to talk pretty extensively in this webinar about what we call 2080 and the challenges in managing a channel. Most of us are familiar from channel management with the notion of 80-20, which is that 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your partners. What we're going to focus on in this seminar, not exclusively but primarily, is how to take advantage of the 20% of revenue that comes from 80% of partners and some of the challenges that are intrinsic in that business. And over the last year and a half, MarketSource has developed two innovations which we believe are compelling to turn what we believe that 20% of your business into, say, 40% or 60% without having to increase the number of partners. And those two innovations that Kevin and I are going to talk about are using marketing and sales automation to drive ROI, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a second, and then leveraging outsourcing as a way to drive service level agreements and repeatability in those revenues that were associated with the 2080. And then finally, we're going to talk about a case study that we've done with a large technology vendor who will remain unnamed but is one of the major players in the industry, and how we solved their 2080 problem using both of these technologies that we're going to talk about in a second. So with that in mind, let's talk about two of the big challenges associated with this 2080 problem. The first big challenge is that, it's not surprising for those of you that manage a channel that your top partners, your gold and silver or platinum or whatever you call the medallions associated with the best partners that you have, the big resellers, the guys that really pull the revenue for you, that they account for the majority of your revenue, hence the 80-20. And then the typically unregistered or bronze, the lower end of the partner universe, typically are the ones who account for the less than 20% of your revenues, and that's where most of the partners are. So the first problem in trying to solve this 2080 dilemma is that typically whenever resources get allocated to that sort of what we call the long tail of the partner universe, they get co-opted. And that's just normal channel management behavior because partners essentially who don't produce don't get a lot of attention. And so what happens is the producing partners get the love and the long tail gets ignored. So that's the first problem, is the difficulty of covering these partners. The second problem, the second big challenge associated with this business is the economics associated with being able to cover these partners. And what that essentially means is that, it's very difficult to drive ROI when you've got thousands of little partners who don't produce. And that creates what we call challenging coverage models, because any vendor who's trying to put money into that is being asked by his boss, the boss of the channel manager, where's the ROI? So even if you did get them to produce, they might not produce enough, and so you're stuck with the problem of, well, not only can't I get them to produce, but I can't get the money to give them to the team to get them to produce, and so hence the dilemma, this coverage dilemma. Now, when you think about approaching this problem from the point of view of solving it, one of the first big problems you run up against is the fact that channel management to the 2080 is very different from channel management to the 80-20. In the 80-20, you got partners who are part of your partner portal. They belong to your program. When you communicate them with marketing literature, whether it's emails, the arrow going on the top, or whether it's stuff that you do through the web, the arrow on the bottom, those partners get what they need. But at the end of the day, what's happening, Kevin, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, good. Okay. But at the end of the day, when the partners are in the 2080 category, they essentially get what would be considered to be spam. They get hit with tons of marketing. They're not part of the partner portal. They're not regularly engaging with you. And so they feel essentially like they're just getting a lot of information. And maybe even worse, in fact, if you have any channel sales activity going on to them, typically an inside salesperson or someone from distribution who's talking to these partners, those folks don't know what channel marketing did. So you have a fundamental disconnect both with respect to partners engaging the channel marketing activities and the handoff between channel marketing and channel sales. And that's the partner scratching his head thinking, boy, I feel pretty ignored or spammed or unmanaged, or in any case is pretty disconnected when it comes to how I deal with vendor X, who, quite frankly, is not part of my mainstream. And that's the problem, right? Because they're not part of the mainstream, they don't engage. Because they don't engage, you can't afford to engage them better.
Well, let me see if I can echo that back to you, Alan, so make sure that I understood it. The two problems are coverage problems, because the 20% of the partners are garnering most of the channel marketing's attention. And the second problem is economic. It's just not economical to go after the 80% of the smaller partners. And I think what you're saying is that shows up a lot in communications, in that you can manually, forcefully manage the communications with those 20% of the partners who are producing 80% of the revenue, but the communications with the other 80% of the partners are just totally disconnected, and there hasn't been to date an economic way of managing and coordinating all of that.
Perfect. Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, terrific. So as we then move on, what's really called for all of us is creating a vision for how to solve this problem. Because at the end of the day, there's no way you're going to get money to solve this problem unless you have a vision. Even more importantly, you have to have a plan. So we've, as Kevin just summarized, the ROI problem and the large partners get the love problem, the coverage model problem, essentially means it's a high bar. And this is why it's a dilemma. This is why it's hard. It's hard because there isn't an easy answer, but there are some really powerful tools that we're going to talk about that can really move this. By the way, one of the reasons it's so important to do this is because for many of you, we're talking about if you could double or triple that business, which we're talking about here. You're talking about tens, hundreds of millions of dollars of potential business globally. And even if you're a reasonably small vendor, you're still talking about lots and lots of money that's available to you if you can solve the problem. So what does the plan have to have? It's got to have 4 things. And these are things going to sound a little bit like, oh, sure, they're just on a slide, but we're going to show you how you do it. The first is lowering your cost to reach these customers. One of the keys to this business is you can't have a high-cost touch, because if you have a high-cost touch, you're out of business automatically, because these guys aren't people who are producing enough to warrant, say, a field visit in many cases, or in most cases. But at the same time as you lower the cost, you have to increase the touch. So it's a lower cost, high touch model, which is actually kind of a bit of an oxymoron for those of us who've managed channels, but we'll show you how. The second thing is that the touches have to be relevant and of value. And one of the problems with managing these partners is that oftentimes our touch points are warmed over, and we haven't thought through exactly what the right sort of key to unlock this lock is. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Third, you have to synchronize and coordinate marketing and sales. So that's that last slide that Kevin showed you, which is the disconnect between channel marketing and sales. You have to figure out how to tie them together so that there is a seamless interaction between what channel marketing does through emails and websites, portals and web pages, and what channel sales does as a consequence and response to that activity. So that's the synchronization. And finally, and this is the Holy Grail, you got to show ROI. You got to be able to show your manager that if they put $1 into this business, not only are they going to get $10 back, which is the magic 10x return on expenses, but that you can actually move this dial and turn some of the 20% of your revenues into significantly producing partners who then bump into the 80%, and enough of a run rate business on the 20/80 to warrant the overall return. So that's what the plan's got to entail.